So, in my last video, I challenged myself to make an art piece with a random limited colour palette, and that made me think, what if, instead of just a few colours, I used all the colours? So, that's what we're doing today. But first, if you're new here, hi, I'm Beth. I'm a fibre artist, knitter, storyteller and all-round creative, and I make videos about the magic and mindfulness of making to, hopefully, inspire you to live more creatively. Now, without further ado, let's get into today's crafting adventure. I figured I needed to start with a plan. So I sketched up some ideas, trying to think of what would allow me to use as many colours as possible. My main inspiration here were some fibre artists I've seen on Instagram, Jennifer Wraitson and Laura Gutzwiller. I knew I wanted to do a landscape with a dramatic sunrise or sunset because not only do I love a good sunrise or sunset, but also it would allow me to use a good range of yellows, oranges, reds, purples, pinks and blues. And if there were any of these colours I didn't use in the sky, I figured I could use them for flowers in the foreground, also adding some woodland animals to use some more browns. I mocked up the composition in pencil, then used some pastels to just loosely give an impression of what the colours might look like together. I was pretty sure I wanted to do something along these lines, but decided to try something different for my second sketch, just to explore my options. So here I'm sketching out a woodland scene with a pair of dragons in a clearing, which, by the way, I found pretty tricky to draw. Never mind then trying to colour them in with imprecise pastels. Most of the picture is green and brown, and I'd use other colours mostly for the dragons, and some flowers here and there, and maybe I could again add in some woodland creatures if needed. But I didn't include these in the drawing as I felt it unlikely I'd go with this one. Also, I'm aware I didn't do very well at perspective in this one, and that's something I definitely need to work on as an artist. For my third and final sketch, I basically combined these two ideas, taking the distant mountains and sunset from the first sketch, and the trees and dragon from the second. I also added a lake to help fill in some of the middle distance, and also just because I thought it would look nice. I think it should be no surprise that I decided to go with the third option. So, once I knew what I was doing, with this piece I mean, not my life, I grabbed my foam mat, my felting needle, a rectangle of pre-felt to use as backing, and all my balls. Since it would take me a long time to needle felt the whole background thoroughly, I decided I would instead needle felt it lightly, just enough to hold everything in place on my easel, and then wet felt it. I'll add the foreground with a more thorough needle felt later. disadvantage of only felting very loosely, apart from the speed you can work at, is that if you decide you should have started adding another colour lower down, it is fairly easy to pull the colour below off and put your new colour in underneath it. Slowly, I added darker blues to the top of the picture to add depth to the sky, and I also added wisps of these colours lower down the picture too, to blend the colours together and create a smooth gradient. At first, I worried this would muddy it and make it look messy, but I think it actually adds a lot of complexity. I wasn't sure if I was done with the sky or not yet, but regardless, I decided to move on to the mountains, so I could start to see how the sky would work with the rest of the picture before deciding how to proceed with it. I used this light blue for the mountains to create the illusion of distance, then added some subtle shading and highlights with wisps of lilac and bluish white. It's barely noticeable, yet I feel it adds a lot of dimension. Then I tore up some bits of various shades of green and kind of roughly blended them together for the tree line on the horizon. I took small chunks of this colour blend and smushed them into little nests to create organic shapes for the trees. Even though the tree line wasn't done, I apparently decided it was time to start the lake. And then I went back to the tree line and decided mixing the different greens together by hand just wasn't good enough. So I got my carders out. I feel like you can kind of tell at this point that I kind of struggle to just focus on one thing at a time, because now I'm working on the reflections on the lake. And now I'm adding some brown at the base of the trees to imply both the tree trunks and the shoreline of the lake. And now I'm filling in the rest of the landscape by layering different shades of green. I went with light, bright shades in the centre and dark at the edges. I'd like to say this was some kind of intelligent artistic choice because of how light works or something, but to be honest, it just seemed right. With the whole canvas now filled in, I decided it was time to go back and add in some more interesting colours to the sky. I feel like this is where it really started to come alive and pop. And of course, any changes I made in the sky needed to be reflected in the lake. The final finishing touch was to add some accents using mulberry silks and sari silks. I added some yellows and pinks to the sky. The texture of the silk just adds this lovely lustrous, shiny quality. Then I added some of this white silk to the lake to help give the impression of water. Now it's time to wet felt it. I don't have any fancy felting equipment, just old bubble wrap and an empty milk bottle filled with hot, soapy water and with holes pierced in the lid. Now, if you're a knitter or crocheter, you've probably heard that if you don't want your woolen creations to felt when you wash them, you have to avoid hot water and agitation. So, we're just going to do the exact opposite here. Once I've sprinkled hot water all over it and it's nicely saturated, I'm gonna agitate it a whole bunch by telling it dad jokes. By rolling it back and forth in the bubble wrap. Now to wait for it to dry before we can needle felt the foreground. So I've been working downstairs this morning to make sure I could hear the door because we were expecting a delivery. I've kind of turned the living room into a bit of an art studio. And I have here my pile of colours that I've used. And over here, yeah, I just brought these entire storage thingies down because that seemed easiest. And so these are the walls I haven't used yet. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to move all of the ones I haven't used yet into one of these, and then all the ones I have used into the other, so that the sofa can then be clear and I can sit and have my lunch on it. Because I'm probably gonna resume doing this tomorrow because the picture now has to dry. I've just finished wet felting it and now it has to dry. So, you know how I said we were waiting for a parcel yesterday and that's why I was downstairs in the living room? Well, it turns out the parcel was meant to be delivered today, not yesterday. So I didn't actually need to be in the living room yesterday, but I do need to be down here today, so we're still down here. I started with the trees on either side of the picture. To start the tree trunks, I twisted the pieces of roving to keep the fibres together and felted them down thoroughly. For the roots and branches, I just separated the fibres into narrower strips that branched off from each other. do a fair amount of futzing to get the second tree looking okay. I don't know, I just felt like it looked weird. But you know, I just kept stabbing it and eventually I decided it looked fine. For the leaves, I blended some of the different shades of green together and placed chunks at random to simulate the mottled effect of foliage. I felted them fairly lightly to give a less precise and more 3D impression. It was kind of tricky to try and balance adding a realistic amount of leaves while also trying not to cover up too much of the sky. In the end, I do think I blocked more of the sky with the leaves than I'd have preferred, but what can you do? It's done now. I initially wasn't sure how to handle the part where the leaves met the edge of the piece. Then I decided it would be fun to have the trees reaching out of the frame. So I felted patches of leaves to the top and sides. At first I felted them somewhat loosely, then realised it would be quite difficult for them to hold their shape and stay attached to the piece once I remove it from the foam, so I felted them a bit more thoroughly. Now for the tricky bit, the dragon. I started by just chucking a clump of wool on there and shaping it into a general dragon shape as I felted it down, adjusting and adding more to fill in the gaps as needed. Then I spent ages adding shading and details, using a mixture of charcoal and deep red for the darker parts and this brighter red for the lighter parts. I found it quite difficult to make the different parts of the dragon distinct from one another, like the folds of the wings. I can't decide if I'm happy with how it turned out, or if I think it looks kinda derpy. Next, I went back to the trees because I realised some of these carded brown wools would be perfect to add some shading and highlights on the tree trunks. Now, these don't count towards my using all my colours challenge because they're effects fibres rather than standard wools, but these wool locks are too perfect for adding foliage to a piece, so I couldn't resist using them. These wools I decided would be the perfect colours for flowers to be added in amongst the foliage in the foreground. After the first few blended in and ended up a bit flat looking, I felted little bits of wool into circles directly on the foam mat, then attached them to the piece by felting them onto it only in the centre. That way the edges of the circles can sort of pop out from the piece a little bit, creating the impression of petals. Then I decided I still wasn't quite happy with the trees and added more shading and highlights to the leaves. I also expanded the amount of leaves reaching out of the frame. I'd done this far more on the tree on the left compared to the tree on the right, so I tried to balance it out a bit more. To use this orange wool, I decided a fox in the foliage would be fun. Here I'm deciding where to position it. Initially I started felting Mr. Fox straight onto the piece, Then decided he was turning out too big, so I removed him and felted him on the foam mat so I could try and condense him down a bit and get the shape right before attaching him to the piece. Off camera, I also felted him a tail to stick out from behind the bush, and also a rabbit on the other side of the piece. Okay, it's been like a week, if not more, since I worked on this piece. Has it? No, I did do some work on it the other evening, at the end of last week. Anyway, I think these are the only two colours I haven't used yet. Although possibly this one, I'm not sure about this one. And I don't know where to add them in. I'm sort of wondering about maybe adding in a squirrel, maybe? I don't know, every time I add something to this I'm like, oh, I'm gonna ruin it! So I don't know. I guess I will try and add a squirrel. I guess I might card some of these colours together. Yeah, I think I'm gonna card some of these colours together and maybe do a little grey squirrel. I wanted to make the squirrel's tail quite textured and 3D, so I took small bits of wool and felted just the ends in place, starting at the end of the tail and layering the wool as I worked my way up. Except I didn't really like how that ended up looking. It was way too big for one thing. So first I tried to trim the excess wool down, and then I tried lightly felting it down, repositioning it as I did achieve a different shape, but still ensure that fuzzy texture. One picture made with all the colours of wool I own. And for the most part, it wasn't even too stressful a process. I did get a bit worried when I started adding the trees and the animals. I knew those had the potential to ruin a really solid start with the background. But although I feel like the animals maybe need some tweaking, and definitely would have benefited from the use of reference pictures, rather than being done from memory, I think they turned out somewhat decently. I think they maybe need a bit more definition, but for a first attempt at most of these animals, I'd say I'm pretty pleased with them. I think the trees also need a bit more work next time I try something like this. I especially love how the sky and the reflection in the water turned out, and I do like all the bits that are kind of coming out of the frame. I think that's a fun idea, but having said that, I have no idea how I'm going to go about framing it. I also love all this texture at the bottom. I just think that's so fun. I think next time I'll see if I can make some more like specific flowers rather than just like doing little blobs. The blobs look fine, but I do wonder if I could improve things by just putting a little bit more effort in that regard. But overall, I love how striking and colourful it is, and I'm really excited to try more similar things in the future. Just maybe not when I'm obligated to use every single colour I own. Alright, that's all I've got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please do leave a like and a comment. If you'd like to see more, here are some more of my art videos, and feel free to subscribe. Until next time, happy crafting.